I need to talk about something, and it's a little bit of a vent because it's something that I'm seeing way too much in the business world. And frankly, it's driving me crazy and it's causing damage. And that is everybody claiming to be an expert at everything and throwing advice out far too easily. It's a problem because I'm seeing it cause so many small business owners just like you to make really poor decisions that ultimately cost way too much money, take up too much time, because what you think you're getting is advice when actually it's just opinion. The difference between advice and opinion is so much more than just semantics. It costs money, legal issues. It can lead to business decisions that take heaps of time to unwind, not to mention all the headaches and sleepless nights that it can cause when you follow down the path of something that you wish you hadn't have. And maybe some of you listening have been there. So today I'm going to help you spot the difference between advice and opinion and to support you to protect yourself from what I see is a bit of a growing problem in the coaching, consulting, and advice and opinion giving industry. Let's dive in. So let me give you a really personal example and almost the standard that I set for myself. So recently I ran my high performing teams workshop here in Brisbane. And at the beginning of the workshop, I naturally introduced myself to the room and I walked everybody through my background. So that's 20 years in HR and recruitment, the fact I've started 3 businesses, that I've hired over 50 people to work directly for me in those businesses, and have hired hundreds and hundreds for other people and hundreds of businesses across hundreds of different industries. But here's what I made crystal clear. I said, you guys can ask me any question you want to, and I will let you know where I can give you advice and where I have opinions, because they're different. So from my own business experience, for example, I've had experience franchising. So my first business, we were actually a franchisor and we sold for franchisees. So if somebody wants to ask me, and I get asked a lot about franchising as a way to build out your team, so I can give you an opinion and I can talk to you from my business experience, but I can't give you advice on franchising because I'm not an expert in franchising. No way, because I've had one experience and that one experience does not make me an expert. I've also hired over 50 people for my 3 very different businesses, but even that doesn't necessarily make me a hiring expert. I am a hiring expert, but that's because I'm an industry professional and I have industry experience in HR and recruitment. And I've hired hundreds of people across hundreds of industries in hundreds of different types of businesses. And it's that breadth of experience which allows me to actually give advice on hiring while also sharing, of course, my personal experience from my personal businesses and bringing them to the table, as examples, and to let people know that I understand how all this feels. So here's the standard that I hold for myself. I only give advice where I have deep, repeated professional experience, and everything else, I'm happy to share my opinion or share my business experience, but I'm clear that that's not advice giving. So I want to dive into the 4 ways that I'm seeing this go wrong and the impact that it's having on small businesses when people are being given advice, which is actually just opinion. So the first one is where the sample size of one is happening. So what I see happening a lot is people giving advice from the perspective of, I did this in my business and this worked, so you should do it too. I also see this happening a lot where people are making recommendations or referring team members to work with other people, and it's always coming from a really well-intentioned place. However, what I see is happening is that the person on the receiving end of this is receiving this as, that recommendation as advice, when actually it's just an opinion. This person is good in my business. See what they're like in yours. I've heard this person is really great. Go and check them out for yourselves. But what I see the person on the receiving end is I'm being given advice that I should hire this person. And the reason that it's dangerous, in the same way, the people selling the, hey, I did this in my business, you should do it in yours, this worked for me, you should do it kind of, methodology, formula, offer, is that they don't necessarily understand why it worked in their specific context. and therefore why it may not work in someone else's context. And often what I see is this inability to talk about the implementation and the tweaking and the variations that are required to make things work in different businesses, because one size does not fit all. And unless you've had experience with a greater sample size than just one, as in a greater sample size than just this worked for me in my business, then you can't possibly guide people on what it's going to look like or how they need to tweak it or how they're going to fix it if it doesn't work perfectly for them. So the way that you can spot if this is the sort of advice that you're being given is just to simply ask questions. And one of the questions that I recommend you ask if somebody to work out, is someone giving me advice or are they just sharing with me their business experience, is just to say things like, how many times have you seen this work? Have you ever seen it fail? What made the difference between when it worked and when it didn't? Okay, so the second scenario that I'm seeing this come up that I want to talk about is where people who are generalists are giving specialist advice that frankly they shouldn't be. And there are hundreds of examples that I'm seeing literally on a daily basis that's driving me a little bit crazy. And it's stuff like, do we need to pay superannuation to our subcontractors? And the reality is, if you're not taking that advice, if you're not talking to someone who's an accountant or a lawyer, then you are receiving an opinion, not advice. I also see the question being asked, should I hire an employee versus a subcontractor? And again, if you're not talking to a hiring strategist, a HR strategist, then you're just hearing opinion about what has worked somewhere for somebody else. I also see a lot of people handing out templates. This is what we've used in our business, so this is what you can use. Maybe it's a job description, maybe it's a job advertisement, maybe it's an employment contract, maybe it's the terms and conditions that you can put on your website, etc., etc. And again, if this is a legal document, if this is a tax document, if this is something that you're going to use in your business, you have to be really careful not to infer it'll be okay because they used it. Because again, the big problem here is, although the people who are handing it out absolutely mean well, and I'm not taking anything away from that, and I'm not saying that the intention there is anything other than good, they don't necessarily understand the complexities or the uniqueness or the little things that are in your business that may make that document not quite right for you. And they're not the person that you'll need to go to for support if it goes wrong. And often they don't even know what they don't know because, just because it's worked for them, unless they're an industry professional, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. The third way that I'm seeing, advice versus opinion showing up and causing problems is this language or this rhetoric that everybody does this in the industry and therefore it must be okay. So everyone in your industry, or I've seen lots of people in the industry doing this, in the inference that somehow that makes it okay. I've never heard of anybody, having any approaches with this problem. It's a pretty standard practice. I see this all the time in the employee versus contractor space, the paying superannuation, not paying superannuation. There's just this whole everybody's doing it, therefore it must be okay. And I want to say advice being given that's frankly not correct. I guess because what I can share is, because the work that I do is across so many industries, there aren't too many industries that I haven't touched. I've worked with everything from engineering to frozen food delivery services to service-based businesses and online businesses and in-person businesses and fitness businesses and Pilates studios and all sorts of things. There aren't too many industries that I haven't had experience in. And what that variety of experience across lots of different industries has shown me is that industry standards aren't always legally compliant. And I've seen that a lot because what's commonly done isn't always right. And I've also seen, the various government bodies, whether it's the ATO or whether it's even just local councils, decide to crack down on an industry and an industry practice. And then they go through and they sweep and they clean up these industry standards that have been happening that were never legally compliant. So if you are receiving advice from somebody and that advice is everyone in your industry does this, then don't assume that that makes it okay, and don't assume that makes it compliant, and don't assume that therefore it makes it right for you. Because the other thing is that you might have a completely different risk appetite to some of the people in the industry, and it may suit you and your personality and your style better to get it right from the outset. And to reflect on a situation that I've faced recently, I've had 2 separate clients come to me in the last month wanting to work with me, and I had sent them off for conversations with employment lawyers before starting work with them, even though I knew the answers to their challenges. And now, why? You might ask why and think that's completely crazy. That's because I believed they needed legal clarity and legal guidance from the outset from a legal expert who would then be able to ensure that they're put on the right path and they had that relationship established in case they needed that support down the track. Because sometimes understanding the law, particularly employment law, can be a little bit grey. And if you just look around to, hey, what's everybody else in the industry doing, then it's easy to find yourself in a situation where you're not necessarily doing something that's legally compliant. You're doing something that's an industry norm, but not legally compliant. And that might be an okay thing for you to choose to do, but you want to do that having weighed up and fully understanding the risks and what you're going to do if an employee or somebody who also thinks it's grey decides to challenge you. So, my recommendation to my clients is get the advice from the person who's going to stand beside you and support you if this goes wrong. Because business is not a straight line, right? It's not always black and white. And even when you've done everything completely right, you might find yourself in front of Fair Work. You might find yourself in a small claims, court tribunal question, etc., where you have to defend the decisions that you've made, even though they were completely right because someone is challenging you. So my guidance is get the advice from the person who will need to support you if you get challenged or if it goes wrong. Okay, and the last area that I want to chat about where I see this advice being given out when it's actually opinions is Facebook groups and business groups. I'm sure you've seen it yourself. Somebody puts up a post in a business group saying, this is my situation. What should I do? I see it all the time. What about team member doing something in particular and asking, should I let this person go? Or what should I do, etc. And they get all these responses full of opinion and business experiences. Now that's really supportive and that can give you a beautiful sense of this happens to everybody. I'm not alone. I haven't done anything wrong. This is normal. So the normalization that you get from the responses is beautiful. But the reality is what you're getting is experience and opinions, and it's not advice. Nobody in a Facebook group, nobody in response to a tiny post that you've put up could possibly understand your, context, and all the details that they need to be able to actually give you advice. And now those people probably aren't even trying to give you advice. They're probably just sharing their opinion and their expertise. And that's lovely and supportive of them. But it's really important you don't take it as advice because, particularly if you're in an emotional situation wondering what to do, the emotional you will probably go and look for the response that most suits you and is closest to the one that you want to hear. Whereas when you're getting real advice from somebody, you get the advice that you need to hear, which isn't necessarily the one that you want to hear. And the reality is that nobody is responsible for dealing with this, for the outcome, for when it goes wrong, for carrying the weight of unwinding it, etc., other than you. So here's my delineation and my guidance and my rule for you. Take advice from the person who has seen it go wrong, who knows how to avoid things going wrong, and who can ultimately support you if something goes wrong. So for example, writing an employment contract, use a lawyer who will stand beside you if you need to enforce that contract. Don't draft up your own confidentiality clause and then hope it stands up. Get the wording from the person who will help you hold it up if you need to. If you are wondering what expenses are tax deductible, ask your accountant, ask your bookkeeper who will help you deal with the ATO if you happen to find yourself unfortunately, getting audited. If you want to structure your team for growth, then work with somebody who understands your business goals, who takes the time to understand, who's worked across lots of different businesses and industries and has seen the good and the bad of all the different models and can support you to make that decision in a fully understood, options, risks, mitigants, pros and cons kind of way. And if you just are looking to hear about other people's experiences, get some empathy and sympathy and just feel like we're not in this alone, which I completely get, then talk to business buddies, ask around in Facebook groups, receive the opinions and experiences of others, but just don't make the mistake of receiving it as advice when it's not. Now, here's the thing. Your need for good advice from experts will grow as your business grows. And it's not realistic to think that everybody can get all the advice and pay for all the advice from the experts from the get-go. Don't get me wrong, you never would have got your business off the ground if you're paying for everything to be perfect from day one. I completely understand that. But there does reach a time and a point in your business when it's time to move out of that scrappy startup phase where you borrowed ideas, figured things out on your own, and crossed your fingers and hoped for the best. Now, this evolution is completely normal and it's necessary. And today's episode is not coming from a place of judgment because I completely get it. Like, you can't pay, as I said, for all the expert perfect advice from the outset, but you can't continue to operate like that forever. You can't stay in that scrappy, free, borrowing advice phase. Or you can, but you'll probably find yourself very stressed, wasting time, unwinding things and learning things the hard way. You've got to evolve. And part of that is working out where to put your money based on your understanding of what's at risk, how much impact does this have, is this important, and therefore, who do I need to take the right advice from, who will be able to hold my hand through the implementation and support me if this doesn't quite go to plan. So as your business becomes more established, you'll find yourself shifting from free advice from anyone to targeted expertise from professionals. And the same will apply in your team. You'll start off with general people who can do all the things, and then you'll have to evolve to specialist people who know how to do certain things really well. You'll also, as a CEO, find that you're shifting from, hey, this worked from other people to what's right for my specific situation. And similarly, and in the same way, you'll be shifting from the cross the fingers, hope this works kind of way to knowing that I'm covered if this doesn't turn out as I expect it to. So as we wrap up, I want to share with you, my recommended questions and some things that you can ask to work out, am I receiving advice from an expert or am I receiving opinion from somebody who isn't quite an expert? And that's asking things like, how many times have you seen this work? Have you ever seen this approach fail? What happened? What's your experience base for recommending this? How many businesses have you seen this applied to? Is this your specialist area? Do you niche in this area? Do you work specifically in this particular thing? Or is this one of many things that you work in? Are you the person who'd be able to support me if this doesn't quite go to plan? Are there other specialists that I could talk to about this? Are there other specialists that you know who specialize just in this? And then questions to see if somebody understands your context or the nuances of your business is, can you see how my situation might be similar or different to people you've worked with before? What factors might make this work versus not work in my business? Okay, so I hope that has given you a little bit of insight and not too much of a rant on what I've been seeing a lot lately and the problem that it's causing, and to give you some guidance on how to work out, is it advice? Is it opinion? Is it just general business experience that I'm receiving here? And if you are recognizing that maybe you've been taking some advice about team from the wrong sources, or you want to get some specialized advice about your team, then obviously I'd love to have a conversation with you. And it's one of the reasons I have introduced my new service, which is called the Personalized Team Performance Audit, which is not generic advice. It's a structured assessment where I bring all my 20 years of HR and recruitment experience to the table to give you specific, actionable recommendations for your team situation, for your unique, business goals, and for your unique personality as a CEO. So the team performance audit is a questionnaire that you complete, and then we have a 45-minute laser-focused diagnostic session where I ask more questions to uncover more context and more information that I need to know to make recommendations. And then I complete a recommendations document for you, including priorities of things that you should work through. So you can see that I get you to give me some information. I ask more questions. I uncover more of the things that I need to know, and then I'll make recommendations. And that's professional advice that you can implement with confidence. So if you're interested in that, check out paulamaidens.com. You'll find Team Performance Audit under the Services tab, or it's Team-Performance-Audit. Or you can just email me at paulamaidens.com and put audit in the subject line and I'll send you through the link. Okay, so that's it for today. Remember that there's a really huge difference between giving advice and receiving someone's opinion. And I really just want to encourage you all to protect yourself by understanding the source, question the person's experience base, and get real expertise for the business decisions that you're making that truly matter. Because your business deserves more than borrowed opinions that's being passed off as advice and expertise. So I really want to encourage you to invest in the right expertise to save yourself the time, the money, and lots of unnecessary stress. Okay, so thanks again for letting me rant a little bit today and get that off my chest. It really matters to me because I just want to see more small business owners just like you having more profitable, more enjoyable, more sustainable businesses and ones where you have beautiful lives as well as great successful businesses. Okay, so until next time, thanks for tuning in and I hope you have a great week.